The weeks that followed the Hartcliffe gathering moved with the slow, grinding patience of a millstone. No sudden catastrophe, no single morning that announced itself as the one that would break her. Just the incremental, terrible accumulation of distance, invitations that arrived less frequently, then not at all. Conversations that grew carefully brief. The particular quality of silence that settles around a woman when the world has made its assessment and found her wanting. Marianne bore it the only way she knew how, quietly and without apology. She understood the arithmetic of what she had done. Her title was old enough, her wealth sufficient, her prior reputation respectable enough that a single scandal, if it did not deepen, might be weathered. She had made her calculation in the library that night in less than a minute, the way a woman learns to calculate when the world offers her very few moves on the board. She had looked at the stranger. She had looked at Vane. She had understood that whatever that man had done or not done, he was not going to survive what Mortimer Vane intended for him, and she had stepped forward. What she had not calculated was Vane himself. She had assumed, in her not inconsiderable arrogance, that he would be content, that a man of his nature would take the gift she had handed him, the tidy resolution, the convenient culprit, and leave well enough alone. She had underestimated the particular appetite of a man who has spent years building a fortress of lies and lives in daily terror of the one person who might one day dismantle them. Mortimer Vane did not merely want her silent, he wanted her destroyed, because a duchess who had taken a stranger's blame in silence could one day choose to stop being silent, and he could not afford that. By December, the rumors had acquired detail they had not originally possessed. It was no longer merely a scandal of association. Now there were whispers of a forged letter, allegedly in her hand. A servant who claimed to have overheard something he had not. A solicitor, a man Marianne had never met, who had allegedly been approached by an agent of the Duchess of Hartcliffe 3 weeks before the gathering, with instructions that bore a troubling resemblance to the crime now attributed to her. Each piece was small, each deniable. Together, they formed a shape that was almost impossible to dispute without revealing what Marianne had chosen to protect. She was in the garden when Lady Frances Colborne came to tell her about Sir Edgar Coyle. Frances was the closest thing Marianne had to a true friend. They had come out in the same season, married in the same year, been widowed within 18 months of each other. She arrived that afternoon with the expression of a woman who has decided that the kindest thing she can do is be honest. "He has opened a formal inquiry," Frances said without sitting down. "Sir Edgar, the papers were filed yesterday." Marianne set down her pruning shears. "On what grounds?" "The forged letter." Frances finally sat heavily. "If this reaches a formal hearing and you cannot produce a counter-account, I know what it means. Do you?" Frances looked at her with the desperation of someone who loves a person they cannot reach. "Because you are behaving as though you have already accepted it. Not accepted, endured. There is very little difference from where I am standing." Marianne looked out at the bare winter garden, the skeletal trees, the iron sky. She thought about the stranger in the library, the stillness of him, the way he had not begged, not bargained, not even turned around when Vane's voice entered the room. She had thought she was saving someone weak. She was no longer certain of that. She was no longer certain of much. "There is nothing I can say in a formal hearing that does not make it worse," she said at last. "You know that." Frances left. The garden grew darker, and Marianne stood in it and asked herself, not for the first time, what she would do if the person she had saved never came back. The answer was the same as always. She would endure it anyway. The alternative, naming him, surrendering the stranger to Vane's machinery, was not something her conscience was capable of. That was the peculiar burden of her own nature. She had known it since girlhood. She had simply never imagined it would cost her this much. The formal inquiry was set for the 3rd week of February. January was the worst month of her life, and she had had some competition for that distinction. The social exile was now complete, not the gentle coolness of December, but the hard, deliberate variety, where former acquaintances crossed the street rather than acknowledge her. She dismissed 3 servants she suspected had been approached by Vane's people. She reviewed her correspondence with exhausting vigilance. She slept badly. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in the last week of January, her butler appeared at the door of her study with the expression of a man who had been asked to do something he found professionally distressing. "Your Grace, there is a gentleman at the door. No card. He says his name is Wren. He says he was present at the gathering in October and that you may recall a detail from that evening that will confirm who he is, if you are willing to receive him." Marianne set down her pen and did not move immediately. She had not seen the stranger's face clearly that night. He had been a shape in the lamplight, a pair of shoulders, the tense stillness of a cornered man. But she had noticed one thing, not his face, not even his voice, a detail so small she had half convinced herself she had invented it across months of remembering. A ring on his right hand, its crest catching the light as he gripped the edge of the writing desk. A wren in flight, pressed into dark metal. She had not told anyone. Not Francis, not the magistrate, not a single soul. "Show him in," she said. He was taller than she had registered that night. Lord Adrian Wren was perhaps 32, dark-haired, with the kind of face that had been handsome before it had learned things it would rather not know, which somehow made it more interesting than mere handsomeness would have been. He stood in the doorway in full winter afternoon light and held up his right hand. The signet ring caught the grey gleam from the window. A wren in flight, exactly as she remembered it. "You saved my life," he said. "I need you to tell me how badly you have paid for it." She had prepared, in a vague and not particularly useful way, for this conversation. What she had not prepared for was the directness of him. No pleasantries, no careful preamble, just the words, quiet and absolute, aimed at the exact center of the thing. "Sit down, Lord Wren," she said. She told him everything in sequence, the rumors, the fabricated letter, the planted solicitor, the servant with the convenient testimony. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the fire crackled between them, and the silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have each, in their separate ways, been waiting for this room. "You never told anyone," he said. "No, not even when it would have helped you. Particularly not then." What he knew was considerably more than she had. He had spent 3 months doing what a man in his position could do, and a duchess under inquiry emphatically could not, tracing the real shape of Mortimer Vane's conduct, not the single incident in her library, the pattern beneath, the years of it. Then he told her the thing that changed the temperature of the room. "Sir Edgar Coyle, the presiding officer at your inquiry, served as a junior advocate in a case involving Vane 15 years ago. His conduct was irregular. Vane has known about it ever since. The appointment was not coincidental. Coyle has spent 15 years being quietly owned by the man who manufactured the evidence against you." The shape of it assembled itself in Marianne's mind with cold, quiet clarity. "So the man appointed to determine my guilt has a prior arrangement with the man who invented it." "Yes, which is why I intend to make it impossible for Coyle to deliver that verdict unopposed." He met her eyes. "There is a provision, rarely invoked, that allows evidence of sufficient gravity to be submitted directly to the Lord Chancellor's office, compelling the appointment of a Crown co-presiding officer with equal authority. I have the standing to file it, but it must be filed on the morning of the inquiry itself. If Vane learns of it in advance, he has time to intervene." She understood what he was not saying, that the window would be narrow, that Vane, cornered on the morning itself, was capable of things not reflected in legal proceedings. She stood. "Then I need you to understand something. I will not be quietly pardoned. I will not accept a discreet arrangement, a politely managed withdrawal on grounds that are never specified. That is not what I want. What do you want? I want the truth told, in the room where the accusation was made, in front of the people who believed it. I want Mortimer Vane named, proved, and made to answer." She held his gaze. "If you can give me that, we have something to discuss. If you can only give me a back door out of this, I will find my own way." She had expected him to push back, to explain that the world did not work the way she was describing. He didn't. "You do know that what you're asking for is not a small thing," he said. "I am aware." Vane has held his position for 20 years by making inconvenient truths disappear. And yet, she said, I am still standing in this room, which suggests he is not entirely omnipotent. Lord Adrian Wren smiled, not the careful half-expression she had seen when he first walked in. A real one, brief and entirely unexpected, and it altered his face in a way she filed away without meaning to. All right, he said, then we do it properly. They met 4 more times in January. He brought papers, testimony, financial records, a sequence of dates he needed her to verify against her memory of that October night. She provided what she could, in detail and in order. He listened without interrupting and asked questions that were not the obvious ones, small, lateral questions that opened the problem from angles she had not considered. She found herself revising her understanding of him with each meeting. He was not simply capable. He was a man of genuine intelligence, and he was treating her as one as well. The 5th meeting was the one that mattered. He arrived later than usual, and she knew before he spoke that something had changed. The solicitor Vane used, he said, setting a document on her desk. Aldous Fenn. 3 years ago, he handled the estate of a viscount whose death was ruled natural causes. I have testimony from 2 witnesses employed in that household. Vane was present in the week prior to the viscount's death. Fenn received a significant payment from Vane's accounts within a fortnight of the funeral. He let the silence settle. The viscount's heir has been petitioning for a review of the death ruling for 2 years and has been refused at every stage, until now. Marianne looked at the document, then at him. You are telling me that what happened to me is not the worst thing Vane has done. I am telling you that one of the people he did this to did not survive it. The fire crackled. Outside, London went about its evening business, entirely indifferent to the fact that in this study, the full architecture of Mortimer Vane's long career in cruelty was finally being seen whole. Then we use it all, she said. The morning of the inquiry arrived with a grey, flat sky and a cold that felt deliberate. Marianne dressed without her maid, not for any theatrical reason, but because she needed the silence of the task, the buttons, the stays, the final pin in her hair, to keep herself anchored in her own body. Sir Edgar Coyle's hearing room was off Chancery Lane, and smelled of old paper and institutional self-importance. She arrived early. Francis Colborne arrived 2 minutes after, and sat beside her without speaking, which was the single most loving thing a person had done for Marianne in a very long time. Coyle entered, a small man with a large sense of his own gravity, carrying his importance in the set of his shoulders. He did not look at Marianne when he sat. She noted this. She noted also the way Mortimer Vane, seated at the far end of the room with the comfortable posture of a spectator, did look at her, with the long, measuring look of a man calculating whether what he has built is sufficient. She kept her face entirely still. The hearing began. The forged letter was produced. Witnesses were called. Marianne sat and breathed, and in the far corner of her mind she was counting. Minutes since Adrian had left for the Lord Chancellor's office, distance across the city, how long a clerk might take to carry a sealed document through a cold February morning. Then the door opened. A clerk she did not recognize, carrying a document bearing the Lord Chancellor's seal. He walked to the front of the room and handed it to Coyle. The room went very quiet. Coyle read it. Something changed in his face. Not much, but enough. Vane had gone still in the way of a man whose calculations have produced a result he did not anticipate. There has been a submission of additional evidence, Coyle said, in a voice that had lost its confident register, under the concurrent jurisdiction provision. This hearing is suspended, pending the arrival of the Crown-appointed co-presiding officer. Vane rose. On what grounds could possibly... Lord Vane. Quiet. From the doorway. Enough to stop him entirely. Adrian Wren walked into the room. He carried a leather case. He was dressed now for his actual station, considerably higher than anything Marianne had allowed herself to fully assume. He did not look at Vane. He walked to the presiding table, exchanged a few words with Coyle, and then, only then, looked across the room at Marianne. The briefest possible glance. But she read it completely. It said, "We have it." It said, "Hold." What followed was not fast. It was meticulous and devastating, and it took 4 hours. Adrian presented the evidence in sequence: the testimony about Fenn, the payments from Vane's accounts, the Viscount's reclassified death, with the patient, dispassionate care of a man laying bricks. He called witnesses Vane had not accounted for. He produced documents bearing Vane's personal seal on instructions to the forger. Then he set down his papers and said, in a tone that changed the atmosphere of the room entirely, "I would also like to draw this inquiry's attention to the professional history of Sir Edgar Coyle." Coyle's head came up sharply. Specifically to the case of Harcourt versus the Crown, winter of 1799, in which a junior advocate named Edgar Coyle withheld material testimony at the direction of a third party who stood to benefit from the ruling. The third party was Mortimer Vane. Adrian looked at Coyle directly. The documentation confirming this was sealed at the time. It has since been unsealed at the request of the Lord Chancellor's office and is included in this submission. Sir Edgar was appointed to this inquiry at Lord Vane's petition. His conduct as presiding officer is therefore compromised, and any verdict delivered by him alone cannot stand. The room did not so much go silent as go airless. Coyle's face became the face of a man watching 15 years of careful management unravel in a single February morning. He did not speak. Everyone in that room could read the arithmetic of his expression, that he had arrived believing himself in the position of authority and had discovered, with considerable speed, that he was in fact in the position of evidence. Vane tried once to speak. A bailiff moved closer. He did not try again. When Adrian finished, he placed the final document on the table. The evidence submitted is sufficient to establish that the accusation against the Duchess of Hartcliffe was constructed from fabricated materials, coordinated by Lord Mortimer Vane to conceal his own conduct. I am requesting an immediate declaration of exoneration and the referral of both Lord Vane and Sir Edgar Coyle for separate proceedings under Crown jurisdiction. Coyle looked at the document. He looked at Vane. He made his calculation, a very different one from the morning's original, and he signed. The declaration of exoneration took 30 seconds to read aloud. 30 seconds that were the longest of Marianne's life, and also the shortest. She sat through them with Francis Colborne's hand tight in hers, her eyes fixed on a point in the middle air that was not Adrian, not Vane, not anyone in the room, but something she was only beginning to be able to see, the shape of what came after, the possibility of it. Mortimer Vane was escorted from the room by 2 men who did not look like clerks. He looked at Marianne once as he passed. She held his gaze with the same steadiness she had offered him in her library on a night that felt like it had happened to someone else entirely, and she did not look away until he was gone. Then she breathed. He found her 20 minutes later in the corridor outside. "It's done," he said. "Yes. Are you all right?" She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "I will be," she said. "I think that is more honest than yes." He nodded as though that were precisely the right answer. Then, with the careful casualness of someone raising something they have thought about considerably more than they intend to convey, he said, "The proceedings against Vane will take several months, and against Coyle, I will be called as a primary witness in both. It may be necessary for us to be in regular contact during that period." Lord Wren: "Yes. Are you using 2 separate Crown proceedings as a pretext to continue seeing me?" He looked at her for a moment. "Yes, I believe I am." She almost laughed, a sensation so unfamiliar after the months that had passed that it startled her. "In that case, I suppose I can accommodate it, in the interest of justice." "Of course," he said gravely. "Entirely in the interest of justice." They walked out into the cold February afternoon, into air that tasted of wood smoke and the first intimation of winter beginning to turn. Marianne lifted her face toward the pale strip of sky between the buildings and breathed it in. Not happiness precisely, not yet, but the ground again, solid underfoot. The particular relief of being entirely herself, in full, without apology, having paid the full price of it and received the full sum in return. It was enough to go on with. It was more than enough. In the months that followed, Mortimer Vane's inquiry proved considerably more thorough than the one he had arranged for Marianne. Aldous Fenn, offered leniency in exchange for cooperation, was an enthusiastic witness. The Viscount's death was reclassified. 3 other families emerged with reason to follow the proceedings closely. Sir Edgar Coyle resigned by April. By summer, Vane's world had contracted to the size of the charges against him, and continued to contract until there was very little of him left that anyone in London wished to claim acquaintance with. Marianne's invitations returned. Not all at once. London society does not reverse course with any grace, but steadily, and with the quality of people relieved to now do openly what they claimed they had always intended. She accepted most of them. She declined a few. She exercised, for the first time in years, the pleasure of being entirely selective about her company. Adrian called on her, ostensibly in his capacity as a witness, with a regularity no professional obligation required, but that she found herself looking forward to with an honesty she had stopped managing. They talked about Vane's proceedings first, then other things, then everything, in the way 2 people talk when they have been pulled into each other's orbit by something enormous and discovered, to their mutual cautious wonder that what they find there is rather good. He asked her one evening in late May, with the windows open and the sound of the street drifting up from below, what she would have done if he had never come back. "I would have found another way," she said. "I know you would." He was quiet for a moment. "But I am glad I came back." "As am I." She met his eyes. "Though I want to be clear, I did not take the blame for you that night, because I expected anything in return. What has happened since should not rest on debt." "It doesn't," he said. "The debt was paid the morning I walked into that hearing room. What I feel now has nothing to do with what I owe you." He held her gaze. "What do you feel?" Marianne, who had been careful and principled and self-sufficient and quietly, devastatingly alone, considered the question with the full seriousness of a woman who has learned, at considerable cost, that honesty is the only thing that actually holds. "Interested," she said. "Very interested." He smiled, and this time it was not brief at all. They married in the autumn of 1815, quietly, at Hartcliffe, with Francis Colborne as witness, and the kind of English autumn morning light that makes everything it touches look like something worth keeping. Marianne wore blue. Adrian wore, as he always did, something that suggested he had dressed for the occasion, without making too much of it. What those present remembered was not the ceremony itself, but the moment after, standing in the pale gold morning light, in front of the house that had once been so loud with scandal, Adrian taking her hand and holding it the way he had held it since February, with the specific care of a man who understands the precise value of what he is holding. Not every debt is one you resent paying. Some, if you are very lucky, turn into something you would choose again. Marianne had stepped in front of a blade meant for a stranger, not knowing who he was, not knowing whether he was worth the price. The answer the world gave her back, slowly, at considerable cost, through fire and February and the grinding machinery of justice, was that he was. He had been worth it. Not because he had saved her, but because he had made sure that she saved herself. That is, when you strip everything else away, the only ending worth having. If this story moved you, please give it a like and subscribe so you never miss a new tale. We release new stories every week, and somewhere in the next one, there is a character who deserves to be heard. We will see you there.